I'm Juliana, 26 years old, and I just landed a promotion at my design agency. After moving back with my parents last year to help them financially, I thought things were finally looking up for all of us. Then came that family dinner. Because you can afford it, my father declared, increasing my rent by 40% overnight. I never expected my own family would see me as nothing more than a source of income. Where are you watching from today? If family financial drama hits close to home, hit subscribe now and join me as I share how I found the strength to walk away and the shocking aftermath that followed. Growing up in our modest suburban home in Columbus, Ohio, family always came first. My parents, Thomas and Grace Walker, created a warm household where love flowed freely even when money was tight. Dad worked as a marketing executive at a manufacturing company, while Mom taught fourth grade at the local elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but they provided everything I needed and taught me the value of hard work. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you, Jules, Dad would say, using his special nickname for me. He'd ruffle my dark brown hair as I studied at the kitchen table, often staying up late to help with math problems I struggled with. I was their only child, and they poured all their hopes and dreams into me. When I showed artistic talent in high school, they scraped together money for art supplies and classes. Mom would proudly display my sketches on the refrigerator, changing them weekly like a rotating gallery. Dad bragged about my artwork to anyone who would listen. "That's my daughter," he would beam, pointing to a watercolor landscape that won a school competition. "She's going places." Their support never wavered when I announced I wanted to study graphic design in college. Though the tuition at The Ohio State University stretched their finances thin, they never complained. "We've been saving since you were born," Mom assured me. This is what it was for. College years flew by in a blur of deadlines, design projects, and part-time jobs. I worked at the campus coffee shop and took freelance design gigs to minimize the financial burden on my parents. Despite the packed schedule, those were some of the happiest years of my life. I was pursuing my passion and making my parents proud. After graduation, the real world hit hard. The job market for designers was competitive, and I bounced between unpaid internships and temporary positions. For almost a year, I lived in a tiny apartment with two roommates eating ramen noodles and applying to countless jobs. Finally, Bright Edge Design, a mid-size agency in Columbus, took a chance on me as a junior designer. The pay wasn't great, but it was a foot in the door. I threw myself into every project, staying late and volunteering for the assignments no one else wanted. Then life threw our family a curveball. The manufacturing company where Dad had worked for 25 years underwent a major restructuring. At 54, Dad was laid off with a severance package that wouldn't last long. His age made finding comparable employment nearly impossible in an industry that favored younger, less expensive talent. "I'll find something," he insisted, maintaining a brave face. But as weeks turned to months, the strain showed. His confident posture slumped, and the corners of his mouth turned downward even when he smiled. Mom's teaching salary wasn't enough to cover their mortgage, car payments, and the various debts they'd accumulated over the years. I watched from the sidelines as they dipped into their retirement savings, the worry lines on their faces deepening. After 6 months of Dad's unemployment, they fell behind on their mortgage payments. That's when I made the decision to move back home. My lease was ending anyway, and my small apartment was eating a significant portion of my paycheck. "It's just temporary," I told my parents. "I can help with the mortgage until Dad finds something new." Initially, they refused. "We can't ask that of you," Mom insisted. "You're just starting your life." "You're not asking, I'm offering," I replied. "Besides, I'll save on rent too. It's a win-win." We agreed on a reasonable rent amount, significantly less than what I'd been paying for my apartment, but enough to help them stay afloat. We established clear boundaries about shared spaces and expenses. Dad promised to intensify his job search, and Mom took on additional tutoring hours after school. The arrangement worked well at first. I transformed my childhood bedroom into a cozy adult space, adding a small desk where I could work on freelance projects in the evenings. We fell into a comfortable routine, sharing dinner most nights and catching up on each other's lives. At Bright Edge, I continued pushing myself. While my peers clocked out at 5, I stayed until 7 or 8, perfecting presentations and learning new software. My portfolio grew stronger, and the senior designers began requesting me for their teams. Creative director Sophia Mendez noticed my dedication. "You've got real talent, Juliana," she told me one evening as we reviewed a campaign for a local restaurant. "But more importantly, you've got grit. That's rare." Her words fueled my ambition. I took online courses to expand my skills in UX design and motion graphics, often working until midnight before crawling into bed exhausted but satisfied. After 18 months at Bright Edge, the hard work paid off. Sophia called me into her office one Friday afternoon, and I nervously perched on the edge of the chair across from her desk. "We're creating a new senior designer position," she announced, her usually serious expression softening, "and we want you to fill it." The promotion came with a substantial raise, nearly doubling my previous salary. I couldn't contain my excitement, letting out a small squeal that made Sophia laugh. "You've earned it," she said. "The team respects you, and clients ask for you by name now." That evening, my coworkers took me out for celebratory drinks. Daniel Carter, a copywriter I'd been secretly attracted to for months, raised a toast. "To Juliana, who makes the rest of us look lazy." He joked, his warm brown eyes meeting mine. Later, as we waited for our ride shares, Daniel asked for my number. "I've wanted to ask you out for ages," he admitted, "but you're always so focused on work." I gave him my number, floating on cloud nine. A promotion and potential romance in one day felt like my life was finally falling into place. When I arrived home that night, I shared the good news with my parents. Mom hugged me tightly, telling me how proud she was. Dad smiled and nodded, but something in his expression seemed off. "This calls for a proper celebration," Mom declared. "Special dinner tomorrow night." As I fell asleep that night, I calculated how the raise would affect my savings plan. I could continue helping my parents while finally building a nest egg for my own place. Maybe in 6 months, I could afford a down payment on a small condo. Things were looking up for all of us. Little did I know that my father saw my good fortune through a different lens entirely. The celebration dinner Mom promised was a feast of my favorites. She'd prepared roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, fresh green beans with almonds, and homemade rolls that filled the house with a warm, yeasty aroma. A bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket, a splurge I knew they couldn't really afford. I helped set the table with the good dishes, the ones usually reserved for Thanksgiving and Christmas. The familiar weight of the ceramic plates in my hands transported me back to childhood holiday dinners, before adult responsibilities and financial worries had entered our lives. "This looks amazing, Mom," I said, arranging the silverware. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "My daughter's first big promotion deserves a proper celebration," she replied, but her smile seemed tight around the edges. Dad emerged from his study, where he'd been spending most of his time lately, allegedly job hunting online. His button-down shirt was freshly ironed, and he'd combed his thinning hair neatly to the side. 6 months ago, his clothes had begun hanging looser on his frame, but recently he'd regained some weight. I'd taken it as a sign his spirits were improving. We sat down to dinner, and Dad poured the champagne with flourish. "To Juliana," he toasted, raising his glass. "Moving up in the world." We clinked glasses and began eating. Mom kept the conversation flowing, asking about my new responsibilities and the projects I'd be leading. Dad remained unusually quiet, nodding occasionally, but offering little input. As we finished the main course, Dad cleared his throat. "So, Jules, this promotion comes with a nice bump in pay, doesn't it?" The question caught me off guard. My parents had always been discreet about money matters, rarely discussing exact figures, even within the family. "Yes," I answered cautiously. "It's a significant increase." "How significant?" he pressed, setting down his fork with deliberate precision. Mom shot him a warning glance. "Thomas, that's Juliana's private business." "Is it?" he replied, his voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. "When she's living under our roof contributing to our household, I think it's relevant information." An uncomfortable tension descended over the table. I shifted in my seat, suddenly feeling like I was being interrogated rather than celebrated. "It's about a 40% increase." I finally offered, hoping transparency would ease the strange mood. Dad nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already calculated. "That seems fair, then." "What seems fair?" I asked, confused by his cryptic response. That your contribution to the household should increase proportionally, he stated matter-of-factly. Beginning next month, I think a 40% increase in your rent is appropriate. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. You want to increase my rent by 40% just like that? Because you can afford it, he declared, reaching for his wine glass. Your financial situation has improved, so your obligations should adjust accordingly. I looked to Mom for support, but she was staring at her plate of flesh spreading across her cheeks. Dad, I was hoping to save for my own place soon, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been helping out for over a year now. And we appreciate it, he replied, his tone softening slightly. But the reality is we still need help. My job prospects at my age aren't great. Your mother's salary barely covers the utilities and groceries. But a 40% increase overnight, I countered. That seems excessive. Maybe we could discuss a more gradual increase. Dad's expression hardened. This isn't a negotiation, Juliana. This is what we need from you right now because you can afford it. Those 5 words stung worse than the increase itself. Not because we're family, not because it's fair, not because we need a little more help, but because I could afford it, as if my financial capacity was the only relevant factor. Thomas, Mom finally interjected. Perhaps we should discuss this later. Tonight was supposed to be about celebrating Juliana's achievement. We are celebrating, he insisted, and acknowledging that her success puts her in a position to contribute more to the family. There's nothing wrong with that. The remainder of the dinner passed in awkward conversation. I pushed food around my plate, no longer hungry. The champagne tasted bitter now. When Mom brought out the chocolate cake she'd baked, I could barely swallow a bite. After dinner, I volunteered to clean up, needing some time to process what had happened. As I rinsed dishes, Mom joined me at the sink, her movements anxious as she dried and stacked plates. He doesn't mean to be harsh, she whispered, glancing toward the living room where Dad had retreated to watch TV. He's been under so much pressure. I understand pressure, Mom, I replied. But this feels different. It feels like he's treating me like a tenant, not a daughter. She sighed deeply, setting down the dish towel. There's more going on than you know, Juliana. The financial situation. It's worse than we've let on. How much worse? She hesitated, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank has sent warning letters. My stomach dropped. 3 months? But I've been giving you rent money. Where has it been going? Mom's eyes darted nervously toward the living room again. Your father's been trying to invest his way out of our problems. The way she said invest raised immediate red flags. What kind of investments? Sports betting mostly, she admitted, shame coloring her voice. He thinks he's got a system. Sometimes he wins and it reinforces the behavior. But mostly, he loses. I finished for her. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Dad's mysterious absences, his improved mood when he'd occasionally return home with dinner from expensive restaurants, the hushed phone calls. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, hurt that they'd hidden something so significant. He didn't want you to know. He's proud, Juliana. Losing his job after all those years nearly broke him. So instead of getting help, he's gambling away my rent money. The anger rose in my chest, hot and insistent. Please don't confront him, Mom pleaded. It will only make things worse. I stayed up most of that night staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom. The glow-in-the-dark stars my father had painstakingly arranged in constellations. When I was 10, still clung there, faded but present. They seemed like artifacts from another lifetime when Dad was my hero who could fix anything. The next day, I called my best friend Amara for advice. We met at a coffee shop far from my parents' neighborhood, where I poured out the whole story. That's messed up, Jules, Amara said, stirring her latte vigorously. Family or not, they can't just exploit you because you got a raise. But they're in real financial trouble, I argued, feeling the pull of familial obligation. If I don't help, they could lose the house. And that would be tragic, but it's not your responsibility to save them from bad decisions, Amara countered. especially if your dad is gambling away the money you already give them. What would you do? I asked, desperate for clarity. I'd set boundaries, she said firmly. Offer to help under conditions, maybe pay a portion directly to the mortgage company instead of giving it to your dad. But honestly, I'd probably move out. Her words echoed in my mind all weekend. On Monday at work, Daniel noticed my distraction. Everything okay? He asked as we collaborated on a pitch for a new client. You seem a million miles away. I surprised myself by telling him the whole situation. We'd only had one casual lunch date, but something about his steady presence invited confidence. Family financial boundaries are tricky, he said thoughtfully. My mom tried to guilt me into bankrolling my brother's failed business ventures for years. How did you handle it? Badly at first, he admitted with a rueful smile. I gave in until I was drowning in my own debt. Eventually, I had to move 2 states away just to break the pattern. That sounds drastic. It was, he agreed. But sometimes distance is the only way to reset unhealthy dynamics. The irony is, our relationship improved once money was off the table. His perspective stayed with me as I drove home determined to have an honest conversation with my father about finances and boundaries. That evening, I found Dad alone in the kitchen making a sandwich. Mom had texted that she'd be late due to a parent-teacher conference. This seemed like the perfect opportunity for the conversation I'd been rehearsing in my mind. Dad, can we talk about the rent situation? I began, trying to keep my voice neutral. I want to understand better where the money is going. His shoulders tensed immediately, but he didn't turn around. It goes to household expenses. Where else would it go? Mom mentioned you're 3 months behind on the mortgage, I said gently. I've been paying rent consistently, so I'm confused about where that money went. He slammed the refrigerator door shut and spun to face me. Your mother had no right to discuss our financial matters with you. I'm part of this household too, I countered. If my contributions aren't going toward keeping a roof over our heads, I think I deserve to know. You think because you got some fancy promotion you can interrogate me now? His face flushed with anger. After everything we sacrificed for you, the college tuition, the art supplies, the school trips, do you have any idea what those things cost us? The unfairness of his attack stung. I'm grateful for everything you and Mom did for me. That's why I moved back home to help when you lost your job. But this isn't about gratitude. It's about transparency. You want transparency? He scoffed. Fine. The economy is brutal for men my age. Nobody wants to hire someone who'll need retirement benefits soon. I've tried everything to generate income. Including gambling? I asked quietly. His expression darkened. It's not gambling when you have a system. I've studied the patterns. I'm due for a big win soon. Dad, that's not how it works. That's the gambler's fallacy. What would you know about it? He snapped. Just because you push pixels around for a living doesn't make you a financial expert. I flinched at his dismissal of my career, the very thing he'd once encouraged so proudly. I know enough to understand that betting away rent money isn't a solution. I don't need financial advice from my daughter, he said, his voice cold. What I need is for you to fulfill your obligations to this family without questioning me at every turn. And I need to know that my help is actually helping, not enabling destructive behavior, I replied, struggling to remain calm. Dad's face contorted with anger. Destructive behavior. Is that what they teach you in those design meetings? Big words to use on your father. This isn't productive. I sighed, realizing he wasn't in a place to have a rational discussion. I just want to help in a way that actually addresses the problem. Then pay the increased rent without complaining, he said flatly. That's how you can help. I retreated to my room, shaking with frustration. Later that night, I heard Mom return home and the muffled sounds of my parents arguing. I pulled my pillow over my head, feeling like a child caught between warring parents rather than an adult trying to navigate a complex situation. The next morning, everyone moved around the kitchen in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. As I was leaving for work, I noticed an envelope on the entry table addressed to my father from the bank. My stomach clenched, knowing it was likely another mortgage warning. Over the next few days, I began discreetly searching through papers in the home office while my parents were out. What I discovered horrified me. Not only were they behind on the mortgage, but they had maxed out 3 credit cards. One statement showed repeated cash advances at a casino an hour away. Another revealed online sports betting transactions totaling thousands of dollars. Most shocking was finding a payday loan agreement with an interest rate that made me gasp. They had borrowed against their car and were one payment away from repossession. When I confronted my mother with this evidence, she broke down in tears. "I've tried to stop him," she sobbed, "but he gets so angry, so defensive. He swears each time is the last time." "This can't continue," I said firmly. "He needs help, professional help." "Please, Juliana," she begged, gripping my hands. "We just need a little more time. The increased rent will help us catch up on some of these payments. Then we can address the larger issues." "That's enabling him, Mom. The money won't solve anything if the underlying problem isn't addressed." "I know," she whispered, "but I don't know what else to do." Another family dinner devolved into a heated argument when I suggested Dad speak with a financial counselor. He slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. "I don't need some 20-something telling me how to manage money," he shouted. "You think your little design job makes you an expert. You just draw pictures for a living." His words cut deep. This wasn't the father who had once proudly displayed my artwork. This was a stranger, defensive and cruel. "It's not just drawing pictures," I said quietly. "It's problem-solving communication strategy. The same skills you need right now but are refusing to use." He stormed out, leaving Mom and me sitting in painful silence. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere at home became increasingly toxic. Dad alternated between cold silence and passive-aggressive jabs about my sudden financial expertise. Mom walked on eggshells, trying unsuccessfully to mediate peace. My work began to suffer. I missed deadlines and made careless errors that weren't like me. Sophia pulled me aside after I spaced out during a client meeting. "Whatever's going on in your personal life is affecting your performance," she said, her concern evident. "Do you need some time off?" I shook my head. "I'll get it together. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, be present," she advised. "Sometimes we need to put ourselves first to be effective in other areas of life." Her words resonated deeply. During lunch breaks, I began touring apartments in my price range. Most were too expensive or too far from work, but I kept looking, driven by an increasing certainty that I needed to remove myself from the toxic environment at home. My friend Amara joined me on these apartment viewings, offering moral support and practical advice. "You don't owe them financial martyrdom," she reminded me when guilt would creep in. One Thursday evening, I returned home earlier than expected. As I approached the front door, I overheard my father's voice through the open window. He was on the phone speaking animatedly to someone. "No, it's working out great," he was saying. "Got my daughter to increase her rent by 40%, basically getting her to pay the whole mortgage now." He laughed, a sound that turned my blood cold. "Yeah, told her it was because she could afford it with her new promotion. She wasn't happy, but what's she gonna do? Move out in this housing market." I stood frozen on the porch, my hand on the doorknob. The casual way he talked about manipulating me, the smug certainty that I was trapped, it was the final straw. The next day, I toured an apartment during my lunch break. It was small but clean, with good natural light and a reasonable commute to work. The rent was within my budget, even with saving for emergencies. I applied on the spot and was approved based on my employment history and credit score. "You can move in next week if you want," the property manager told me. I signed the lease with shaking hands, feeling both terrified and liberated. The decision to move out crystallized something inside me. For too long, I'd allowed guilt and obligation to override my own well-being. Hearing my father boast about manipulating me financially broke something fundamental in our relationship, something that couldn't be repaired while living under the same roof. I didn't tell my parents about the apartment immediately. Instead, I waited until they mentioned they'd be visiting my aunt in Cleveland for the weekend. This would give me the perfect opportunity to move without a confrontation. "That sounds nice," I said casually over breakfast when Mom mentioned their plans. "It'll be good for you both to get away for a bit." Dad barely acknowledged me, continuing his pattern of cold shoulders, interspersed with barbed comments. He'd been particularly hostile since our argument about financial counseling. As soon as they left on Friday evening, I sprang into action. Amara arrived with her boyfriend in his truck, and my coworker Daniel showed up with packing supplies. "You're really doing this," Daniel said, helping me wrap picture frames in newspaper. "I have to," I replied, feeling surprisingly calm now that the decision was made. "Nothing will change if I stay." We worked through the night packing my life into boxes and bags. I took only what was truly mine, leaving behind furniture and items that belonged to the household. My childhood bedroom gradually emptied the walls bare of posters and photos the closet cleared of clothes. Each item I packed represented a piece of my identity separate from being Thomas and Grace Walker's daughter. My professional design books, my drawing tablets, the clothes I'd bought with my own money from my own career. Packing them felt like reclaiming parts of myself. As dawn broke on Saturday, we loaded the final boxes into the vehicles. I stood in my nearly empty bedroom, gazing at the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling one last time. They seemed like an appropriate metaphor still there, but faded just like my relationship with my father. I wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table with an envelope containing my final month's rent. "I've moved out. Here's the final month's rent. I'll call Mom next week. Juliana." Brief, direct, and final. Just like my father's pronouncement about my rent increase had been. Daniel helped me carry the last box to his car. "You okay?" he asked, his expression concerned. "No," I admitted. "But I will be." He squeezed my hand and I felt a spark of connection amid the emotional chaos. At least something positive was growing alongside all this pain. My new apartment was a blank canvas, white walls, and beige carpet waiting to be personalized. We unloaded the essentials: first bedclothes, kitchen basics. The rest of the boxes formed a labyrinth in the living room, a problem for another day. When my friends finally left, the silence was deafening. I sat on my mattress on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and let the magnitude of what I'd done wash over me. For the first time in over a year, I was truly on my own. My phone began ringing Sunday afternoon. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mom called. Then Dad again. The voicemails ranged from shocked to angry to pleading. "How could you just leave like this?" Dad's voice demanded in one message. "Please call us back, sweetheart. We're worried," Mom begged in another. I texted Mom only, "I'm safe, need space, we'll call later this week." I turned off my phone after that, needing silence to process my emotions. Monday morning, I arrived at work looking exhausted, but feeling more focused than I had in weeks. "You seem different," Sophia commented during our morning check-in. "More present." "I moved out of my parents' house this weekend," I explained. "It was necessary but difficult." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Family boundaries are the hardest kind. Take care of yourself, Juliana. The work will wait if you need time." But throwing myself into work provided the perfect distraction from the emotional turmoil. I stayed late each evening, partly to avoid my empty apartment, and partly because the creative challenges gave my mind somewhere productive to focus. Daniel brought me dinner one night when I was working on a complex animation project. "Thought you might be skipping meals," he said, placing a container of pasta on my desk. His thoughtfulness touched me deeply. "Thank you," I said, realizing I was indeed starving. "For everything." "That's what friends do," he replied with a warm smile. "And maybe more than friends if you're interested." Despite everything happening with my family, I found myself smiling back. I'd like that. After a week of ignoring my parents' calls, I finally answered when Mom called on a Thursday evening. Her voice sounded small and defeated. "Juliana, please don't shut us out," she began. "We miss you." I needed space, I explained, keeping my tone even. Dad's behavior became intolerable. "He's struggling," she defended weakly. "We both are." "I understand that, Mom, but using me as a financial crutch without addressing the real problems isn't a solution." She was quiet for a moment. "You're right," she finally admitted. "But we need help, Juliana. Real help." "What kind of help?" "Your father." She hesitated. "He gambled away the money for this month's mortgage payment. They're threatening foreclosure now." My stomach dropped. Despite everything, the thought of my parents losing their home hit me hard. That house held all my childhood memories, the good and the bad. "Has he admitted he has a gambling problem?" I asked, knowing this was the crucial first step. "Not yet." she sighed. But maybe if you came by, talk to him. I don't think that's a good idea right now, I replied. He needs to take responsibility for his actions without me there as a safety net. Please, Juliana, she begged. Just one visit. For me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to stop by that weekend. 2 days later, I stood on the porch of my childhood home feeling like a visitor rather than a returning daughter. Mom answered the door, her face lighting up at the sight of me. She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes and clothes that hung looser on her frame. You came, she said, pulling me into a tight hug. The house felt different somehow. Dishes were piled in the sink, mail was scattered across the counter, and the general tidiness that Mom had always maintained was noticeably absent. It looked like a physical manifestation of their crumbling finances. Dad sat in his recliner in the living room, staring at the TV, though it wasn't turned on. He looked up when I entered, his expression an uncomfortable mixture of anger and shame. So you decided to grace us with your presence, he said, the bitterness evident in his tone. Thomas, Mom warned, Juliana is here to talk, not to fight. Talk about what? He challenged. About how she abandoned her family when we needed her most. I didn't abandon anyone, I replied calmly, determined not to get pulled into his emotional manipulation. I removed myself from a toxic situation after you made it clear you saw me as nothing more than a source of income. That's not fair, he protested. Isn't it? I countered. I heard you on the phone, Dad, bragging about how you manipulated me into paying your mortgage. Because she can afford it. Remember, his face flushed red. You were eavesdropping on private conversations now. It wasn't eavesdropping when you were loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. I shot back. You were laughing about it, Dad. Laughing about taking advantage of your own daughter. Mom looked between us, her expression pained. Please, both of you. This isn't helping. What would help, I said, turning to her, is honesty. Complete honesty about the financial situation and Dad's gambling. It's not gambling, Dad insisted reflexively. It's calculated risk. It's an addiction, I stated firmly. And it's destroying this family. Something in my direct confrontation seemed to penetrate his defensive shell. His shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment I glimpsed the vulnerable man beneath the angry exterior. You don't understand what it's like, he said quietly. To lose your identity, your purpose. To feel worthless after a lifetime of being the provider. Then help me understand, I urged. Talk to me, not at me. The dam broke. Years of frustration, fear, and shame poured out as my father finally admitted the extent of his gambling addiction. How it had started small after he lost his job, just a few sports bets to pass the time. How the occasional wins gave him a rush he hadn't felt since being respected in the workplace. How it escalated from a diversion to an obsession as losses mounted. I kept thinking the next win would fix everything, he confessed, tears streaming down his weathered face. That I could solve our problems without having to admit failure. Mom revealed her own painful truth, how she'd enabled his behavior out of fear and misguided loyalty. How she'd covered for him with family and friends, making excuses for missing money and unpaid bills. I thought I was protecting him, protecting us, she said. But I was just making it worse. The full extent of their financial ruin was laid bare. They were 3 months behind on the mortgage, maxed out on credit cards, and had taken predatory loans with astronomical interest rates. Dad had even borrowed against his life insurance policy. My anger gave way to profound sadness. These were my parents, the people who had loved and raised me, now drowning in consequences they couldn't escape alone. I want to help, I said finally. But not like before. Not by enabling destructive patterns. What does that mean? Dad asked warily. It means conditions, I explained. I'll help with the immediate mortgage crisis, but only if you both commit to real change. Dad needs addiction treatment. You both need financial counseling. And I need to see concrete steps, not just promises. Who are you to dictate terms to us? Dad bristled, his pride flaring up again. I'm the person you're asking for help, I replied simply. And I'm setting boundaries to protect myself, and ultimately to truly help you. He started to protest, but Mom placed a hand on his arm. She's right, Thomas. We've hit rock bottom. We can't keep doing the same things and expect different results. The admission seemed to deflate him completely. For the first time, I saw my father as truly vulnerable, stripped of the authority and confidence that had defined him throughout my childhood. I don't know if I can change, he whispered, sounding frightened. You can, I assured him. But you have to want it more than you want the temporary escape gambling provides. We talked for hours, laying out a plan for recovery. I would not move back in, but I would help them find a financial counselor and accompany them to the first few sessions. Dad reluctantly agreed to attend a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, though he maintained it was just to see what it's about. Mom promised to find a support group for families affected by gambling addiction. I insisted she also focus on rebuilding her own identity, separate from Dad's problems. As I left that evening, Mom hugged me tightly. When did you become so wise? She asked. When I was forced to, I replied, offering a small smile. I learned from watching you and Dad all these years, the good and the bad. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that our family might eventually heal. In the weeks that followed that intense confrontation, I immersed myself in researching resources for my parents. Evenings after work were spent scouring websites for reputable financial advisors who specialized in debt crisis management and calling banks to understand foreclosure prevention options. Daniel often joined me at my new apartment, bringing takeout and offering moral support as I navigated this unfamiliar territory. His steadiness became my anchor amid the emotional turbulence. You shouldn't have to parent your parents, he observed one night as I hung up from a particularly frustrating call with my father's bank. Someone has to step up, I replied, rubbing my temples. They're drowning. I found a financial advisor named Marcus Rivera, who specialized in families facing foreclosure. His firm offered a free initial consultation, and I scheduled an appointment for all three of us. Dad initially balked at attending. Some stranger judging our finances. No thanks. It's this or lose the house, I reminded him bluntly. Your choice. He showed up sullen but present. Marcus didn't sugarcoat the severity of their situation, but presented concrete steps toward recovery. The most immediate concern was negotiating with the bank for a mortgage modification. You'll need to demonstrate hardship, but also ability to pay going forward, Marcus explained. That means stable income and a realistic budget. Dad flinched at the word budget, but nodded stiffly. Mom took detailed notes, her teacher's organization skills finally being applied to their own crisis. With Marcus's guidance, we crafted a letter to the mortgage company explaining the situation and requesting a modification. He advised that having me as a co-signer might strengthen their case given my stable employment and good credit score. The request gave me pause. Co-signing would tie me financially to their home, I said carefully. That's a big commitment. You don't have to decide today, Marcus assured me. But it might be the difference between keeping and losing the house. That night, I discussed it with both Daniel and Amara. It's a major legal entanglement, Amara warned. If they default again, it affects your credit too. But if the alternative is them becoming homeless, I trailed off. Daniel took my hand. What would make you feel secure enough to take that risk? His question helped clarify my thinking. I made a list of conditions. Dad would need to complete 6 weeks of gambling addiction treatment. Mom would need to increase her income through additional tutoring. And most importantly, I would make payments directly to the bank, not to them. When I presented these terms, Dad initially reacted with indignation. You don't trust us to pay our own bills. I don't trust your addiction, I corrected him. And until you've demonstrated lasting change, I need this protection. Meanwhile, at Bright Edge Design, I threw myself into my new senior designer responsibilities. The structured creativity of my work provided a welcome contrast to the chaotic emotions of my personal life. Sophia noticed my renewed focus and assigned me to lead a high-profile campaign for a national restaurant chain. Your resilience is impressive, she told me during a review meeting. Many people would crumble under the pressure you're handling. Her validation meant more than she knew. In a life suddenly filled with difficult decisions and emotional labor, my professional success was something tangible I could hold on to. Dad began attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings initially with reluctance, but gradually with increasing commitment. After 3 weeks, he called me one evening. "I got my 30-day chip today," he said, an unfamiliar humility in his voice. "First time in a long while I've accomplished anything." "I'm proud of you, Dad," I replied, genuine emotion tightening my throat. "That's a big deal. The group says I should make amends," he continued awkwardly, "for the harm my addiction has caused." "That's part of the process," I acknowledged. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "But I'm sorry, Juliana, for treating you like an ATM instead of a daughter, for dismissing your career, for betraying your trust." The apology wasn't perfect, but it was sincere. A small crack in the wall between us. Mom found part-time work as an administrative assistant at a local community college, adding 20 hours a week to her teaching schedule. The additional income was modest, but crucial to their recovery plan. "It's exhausting," she confessed during one of our weekly coffee meetings, "but also liberating having my own money that isn't tied to the house or to your father's decisions." I saw her gaining confidence, standing straighter, speaking more assertively. She'd spent decades supporting Dad's career and ego, often at the expense of her own growth. The crisis, painful as it was, had forced her to rediscover her capabilities. At work, my relationship with Daniel evolved from friendship to something deeper. He was patient with my limited emotional availability, understanding that my family situation consumed much of my energy. "We'll have time," he assured me. "I'm not going anywhere." His calm confidence was exactly what I needed when everything else felt uncertain. After 6 weeks of consistent GA attendance for Dad and financial counseling for both parents, I made the difficult decision to co-sign the mortgage modification. The bank agreed to a restructured payment plan that would bring the account current and lower the monthly payments slightly. "This is a legally binding commitment," I reminded my parents as we sat in the loan officer's office. "I'm trusting you to uphold your end of this agreement." Dad nodded solemnly. "I won't let you down again, Jules." The weight of taking on partial responsibility for my childhood home felt both burdensome and oddly appropriate, a physical manifestation of the emotional responsibility I'd shouldered. But I set clear boundaries, including monthly meetings to review their budget and bank statements. "This isn't about controlling you," I explained when Dad bristled at this requirement. "It's about accountability and rebuilding trust." Gradually, our family dynamics began to transform. The weekly financial review sessions evolved to include dinner afterward, creating a new ritual of connection. Dad reached 90 days gambling-free and proudly displayed his chip on the mantle. "One day at a time," he would say, echoing the GA mantra. "Some days are harder than others, but each day clean is a victory." Mom flourished in her additional role at the community college, even being asked to develop a tutoring program for struggling students. Her confidence grew visibly, and she began speaking up more at home, no longer walking on eggshells around Dad's moods. At Bright Edge, I received a performance bonus for the successful restaurant campaign. Daniel suggested we celebrate with a weekend trip to a nearby lakeside town. "Just 2 days away from everything," he tempted. "You've earned a break." It was the first time since the family crisis began that I allowed myself to fully disconnect and focus solely on joy. We hiked along wooded trails, ate at charming local restaurants, and talked for hours beside a fireplace in our bed and breakfast. On the last night of our getaway, Daniel took my hand across the dinner table. "I've fallen in love with you, Juliana Walker," he said simply. "Your strength, your compassion, your creativity, all of you." Tears sprang to my eyes. Amidst the family turbulence, something beautiful had grown. "I love you too," I replied, realizing the truth of it as the words left my mouth. Returning to reality after our idyllic weekend, I found a message from Dad asking if we could meet one-on-one, something that hadn't happened since before the confrontation. We met at a coffee shop neutral territory that felt safer than the emotionally charged space of their home. Dad looked better than he had in months, clear-eyed, well-groomed, his posture straighter. "I wanted to talk to you without your mother present." He began fidgeting with his coffee cup. "About money." My guard immediately went up. "What about it?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." I opened it cautiously to find a check for a substantial amount, roughly equivalent to the extra 40% rent he demanded before I moved out, multiplied by the months I'd paid it. I can't take this, I said, trying to hand it back. You need every penny for your recovery plan. I need to make this right more than I need the money, he insisted. I got a part-time job at the hardware store. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. This came from my earnings, not the household budget. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. He was literally paying back what he'd taken unfairly. Thank you, I said, finally accepting the envelope. This means a lot. There's something else, he added, looking uncomfortable. I've been talking with my sponsor about making amends about how actions speak louder than words. Okay, I said cautiously. I want you to be free of this co-signing arrangement as soon as possible, he stated. You shouldn't be legally tied to our problems. We've been working with Marcus on a refinancing plan that would remove your name once we've established 6 months of on-time payments. His words stunned me. This wasn't the entitled father who had demanded my financial support. This was someone taking responsibility, prioritizing my well-being over his convenience. That would be good, I managed, for all of us. One more thing, he said, reaching into his pocket. I found this while cleaning out some old files. He handed me a faded drawing creased from being folded. It was one of my earliest design projects, a logo for an imaginary company I'd created in high school. You said then that someday you'd create brands people would recognize worldwide, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I saved it because I believed in you. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that feeling, that pride. I'm sorry for dismissing your career as just drawing pictures. What you do matters, and you're extraordinary at it. The simple acknowledgement healed something deep within me. Thank you, Dad. 1 year after that fateful dinner where my father had increased my rent by 40%, we gathered again around the same table. This time the occasion was to celebrate a milestone. Their mortgage was current. Dad was gambling free for 10 months, and I had been removed as co-signer on their loan. The dynamic between us had transformed dramatically. Dad had found a part-time position that utilized his marketing experience consulting for small businesses. It didn't pay what his executive job had, but combined with his hardware store hours, it provided stable income and, more importantly, restored his sense of purpose. Mom had been promoted to assistant director of the tutoring program at the community college, a position that recognized her organizational skills and teaching expertise. The new role came with a significant pay increase, and for the first time in their marriage, she contributed nearly equally to the household finances. My own apartment had evolved from a hasty refuge to a true home. Framed design projects hung on walls painted in colors I'd chosen. Plants thrived on sunny windowsills. It was smaller than my childhood bedroom, but filled with a sense of accomplishment that no square footage could match. Daniel had become a fixture in my life, his toothbrush in my bathroom, and his favorite snacks in my cupboard. We talked tentatively about moving in together when my lease ended in a few months. As we passed dishes around the table that evening, the conversation flowed easily, punctuated by genuine laughter. Mom shared amusing stories from the tutoring center, while Dad talked about a marketing campaign he was developing for a local bakery. They can't afford much, he explained, but they make the best sourdough in Columbus, and they deserve to be successful. The shift in his values was striking. Before, success had been measured solely in dollars. Now he found satisfaction in helping small business owners achieve modest goals. After dessert, Dad cleared his throat. Juliana, your mother and I have something to tell you. A flicker of old anxiety sparked in my chest. Everything okay? More than okay, Mom assured me, reaching for Dad's hand. We've decided to sell the house. Sell, I repeated, surprised. But we worked so hard to save it. We did, Dad acknowledged, and that was important then. But now we realize it's too big for just the two of us, and the maintenance is costly. We found a lovely condo closer to both our jobs, Mom added. It's smaller, but perfect for this next chapter. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. They were literally leaving behind the space where our family drama had unfolded, making a fresh start in a home that reflected their current reality, rather than past expectations. That sounds perfect, I said, genuinely happy for them. A new beginning. Which brings us to the other news. Dad continued glancing at Mom. The equity from the house sale will allow us to do something we should have done a long time ago. Mom smiled. We're setting up a trust for your future wedding or home purchase, whatever comes first. You don't need to do that, I protested. I'm doing fine on my own. We know you are, Dad replied. That's not the point. This isn't about need, it's about love. About being the parents we should have been all along, supporting your dreams, instead of burdening you with our problems. His words brought tears to my eyes. This was the father I remembered from childhood, the one who believed in me unconditionally. Later, as Daniel and I walked back to my apartment under a canopy of stars, I reflected on the tumultuous journey of the past year. $1 for your thoughts, he said, squeezing my hand. Just thinking about how different things are now, I replied. A year ago, I felt trapped and exploited. Now I feel free, he suggested. Yes, but not just that. Empowered. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. He stopped walking and turned to face me. I've been thinking about our future, Juliana, not just moving in together, but beyond that. My heart quickened. Oh, I don't have a ring yet, he admitted with a shy smile. But I want you to know that's where my heart is heading, if that's something you might want too. Under the same sky that had witnessed my painful departure from my parents' home, I found myself embracing a new beginning. It is, I whispered, definitely something I want. The journey from that devastating dinner to this moment of promise hadn't been easy. There had been tears, sleepless nights, difficult confrontations, and painful truths. But through it all, I discovered that true family relationships couldn't be built on financial exploitation or emotional manipulation. They required honesty, respect, and boundaries. My father's words, "because you can afford it," had once cut me to the quick, reducing our relationship to a cold financial transaction. Now I understood that the most valuable things in life, trust, respect, love, couldn't be quantified in dollars or measured in rent increases. The painful financial betrayal had ultimately led to personal empowerment, not just for me, but for my entire family. Mom found her voice and independence. Dad confronted his addiction and rebuilt his sense of worth beyond his earning capacity. And I learned that sometimes walking away is the most loving choice you can make, both for yourself and for those who need to face consequences to grow. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family over money issues? What helped you find the strength to stand your ground? Share your experience in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more stories about finding empowerment through life's difficult lessons. Your support means everything to this channel. Thank you for listening. And remember that true love never comes with a price tag.